Many long-time MMO players fondly reminisce about the days gone when MMOs were far less optimised than they are now, when the games were more of a struggle to play. The old guard complains about today's modern MMO conveniences like tutorials, fast travel, quest markers, minimaps, group finders, and the lack of need to communicate. Many say MMOs have lost the social soul they had so long ago and simply aren't as memorable. However, many of the modern advancements people blame were added as a result of players directly asking for them. Is it possible to design a game to be worse, and yet in doing so actually make the player's long-term experience of it better? Can giving the player a less optimized, less immediately fun experience actually result in them remembering the game more fondly, and indeed even recommending it to players precisely because of the fact it is less optimized? The answer is both yes and no. It's a paradox of adversity within game design, and it's one of the main reasons modern MMOs feel the way they do. It's also what Blizzard was trying to get at when they said, you think you do, but you don't. So let's discuss the actual psychology behind it. As usual, a massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who keep the channel going. More information on how you can support at the end. For now, let's begin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Josh Drive-Hayes. I've been making videos about MMORPG design for years, and one thing that I hear repeatedly from both old players who played the game back in the day and new players who are just discovering them is that older MMOs were better. Now, better is a very subjective word. It's hard to define, it's different for everyone. But with so many old games still online, like the original EverQuest, or classic versions of modern games being released, like World of Warcraft Classic or old school RuneScape, there must be some element of design, some choice, beyond just nostalgia, some reason people keep going back to older designed games. Over the years, I've tried to make videos explaining MMO design, breaking down design elements, comparing choices. I've covered the idea of the meta, the chosen one narrative trope, fast travel, endgame, abundance of MMOs themselves, microtransactions, graphics, level scaling, but now I think I've managed to distill it down to the simplest, most base reason. I'm going to call it the paradox of adversity within game design. It's not the catchiest title, I know, but it explains why making something better for the player in the short term can sometimes remove its ability to have a long-term impact. It's all to do with the human experience of overcoming adversity. Consider the following. If something, say a task or a challenge, is immediately easy, it will have a high number of people attempt it and complete it, because it's accessible to a greater number of people. And because a great number of people tend to enjoy easier things, the task will see a relatively high retention rate. You could consider things like sitting on the sofa binge watching a TV show, or ordering a takeaway, getting dressed in whatever was lying on the floor, calling off a planned meeting because it's raining and you don't want to go. It's low effort, but immediate reward. On the opposite end of the spectrum are very hard tasks with very high rates of immediate failure, or a great deal of input effort required. Fewer people will even attempt it, let alone succeed. And because people don't enjoy failure, many will quit if the first few attempts don't succeed. This could be leaving the sofa to go to a gym, applying for a much harder job than you've currently got, cooking a full 3-course meal from scratch, dressing up in smart or complex clothes, or attending a meeting if the circumstances are against you and you don't want to go. It could be learning a language or training for a difficult sports event such as a triathlon. It's very high effort with a very delayed reward. The paradox is the immediate reward for the low effort input is never as high or as satisfying as the delayed reward for the high input process. The intensity of the reward and the long-term value of it is directly related to the complexity and difficulty to achieve the process. Put simply, if something is easy to do, you'll feel good in the process but not care about the reward in the long term. You likely won't even create a memory of either the process or the reward because it's nothing special. But if something is difficult to do, you'll likely dislike the process of doing it, but then the long-term reward of having done it will have more intrinsic value to you, and the memory you create will be much more intense. This is human nature. We want the easy and immediate, but we place much more long-term value on the completion of difficulty. Nobody wants to struggle, but everyone wants the feeling and satisfaction earned from struggling and succeeding. We don't enjoy the process of overcoming adversity, but we do grow from it. Indeed, the moments of unplanned struggle often become some of our fondest memories. It's very important to understand that the word struggle in this context is not life-changing trauma. It's not extremely negative experiences that you wish you could remove. It means less than optimal, unexpected. It means more difficult than you originally anticipated. It's not extremely damaging, it's challenging within the context of the game. If you go camping with your friends and everything is absolutely fine, you'll likely have an okay trip, but if on the second night it begins to absolutely pour with rain and you discover there's a rip in the tent, you will likely hate it in the moment, but look back on it fondly, laughing with the group as you all reminisce the struggle you overcame. It's often the moments of struggle that we look back on and smile about. We defeated the enemy and we see value in that. If you ask older MMO players some of their best memories, they'll often tell you about all the adversity they overcame, standing selling items in the EverQuest tunnel or the Falador Bank, completing quests without guides, phoning friends in real life to organise a raid. There exists in design a Goldilocks zone of player difficulty, where something is not too easy and not too hard, it's just right. You're not going to frustrate the player and prevent them from finishing the game, but when they do finish the game, they're going to feel an immense satisfaction that they have overcome a perfectly balanced challenge. So how does this all relate back to MMORPGs? Well, remember when Blizzard told you think you do, but you don't?
And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't. Remember when you had to spam cities and say, need a tank, need a tank, need a tank during the Burning Crusade days? You don't remember that because now you just push a button that says go to the dungeon. You don't want to do that.
Here's what they actually meant. It's two elements of human psychology combining. The abundance of choice, meaning we don't stick at one thing when it gets challenging and can easily switch, and the value we gain from overcoming a challenge. Many years ago there weren't as many MMOs, so you have a relatively captured audience. If you didn't like one game, you could go to another, but you'd very quickly cycle through all possible games. The player base didn't have great variety, and a lot of these MMOs were difficult. The players would face adversity in all games, such as no group finders, meaning you had to talk to people, and creating a group could take a while. No quest markers on the minimap, or minimaps themselves, or even in your journal, so you had to write down NPCs' names and locations. No market boards or global trading systems, so it was player-to-player trade only. No tutorial, meaning you were placed directly into the world and you relied on the community to help you, and many games came on physical CDs and took hours to install, with the process often going wrong. This isn't the game itself, but it's still part of an adversity experience. Adversity means a difficult or unpleasant situation, and overcoming it is a good feeling. Now, the adversity in a game doesn't just need to be the boss design or the gameplay. It can be the meta elements, such as having to play a game without a guide, being unable to switch servers and play with your friends, corpse runs, experience debt, almost cryptic levels of description for both quest guides and item descriptions. Older games had a lot of adversity within them. And as we know, while people like the sense of accomplishment which comes with overcoming adversity, they don't always like adversity in the moment. People quit difficult things while they're still in the difficult bit. With older MMOs, this wasn't a major problem for player retention because the players simply didn't have many other places to go. The end result was a hemmed-in player base with a sparse selection of MMOs, all of which had heavy amounts of adversity, and your choice was overcome it or stop playing. And if you stopped playing, then you simply stopped caring. And if you did overcome it, you felt intense personal pride. But as more MMOs were made and player choice increased, the designers saw both opportunities and issues. If they made the player face too much adversity, the players wouldn't push on because they had no other choice, they would leave because now they did have choice. And this put designers into a strange position. They needed to make the systems the players would experience immediately very easy to prevent the players leaving, but in doing so, they were reducing the potential long-term connection the player would have to that system because no one remembers the easy accomplishments. Take the group finder. Without it, players are forced to talk and communicate and connect. Bonds will form, friendships, rivalries. You have to time your gameplay sessions to your guild. The act of forming the group becomes a satisfying ritual itself, and when the group is formed, it will likely stick together because the process of forming another is difficult. The process of forming the group is the adversity, and the feeling of having formed one is now substantial. But then the group finder comes in to remove the adversity of forming the group, and in doing so also removes the feeling of reward of performing it. It's positive for players with very little time, but negative for players who valued the process of making the group. The lack of quest markers on your minimap, or indeed the lack of a detailed map at all, or the lack of fast travel, means you now faced adversity of talking to every NPC, finding a quest, memorizing the world, learning the lay of the land, or becoming friends with a class who could teleport you around. The act of exploring and progressing was the adversity. That was the challenge. It wasn't easy, but for those who could do it, it was fulfilling. Then the minimaps, teleport spells, fast travel, and icons and quest helpers and auto run came along because players were leaving the game before even finding the quests due to the difficulty of the process, and it had to be made easier to increase player retention, or the players would leave for a game which was doing it. Again, in doing so, you are removing the adversity of learning the land at the expense of the player's long-term connection to the land. Most players simply don't have a very long attention span, or a great deal of patience to deal with failure or time-consuming systems, so game designers needed to remove any and all roadblocks to failure, and this became a double-edged sword because they were now taking the process of adversity and resulting satisfaction and replacing it with a mundane, easy process and no emotional reward. This paradox of adversity can be applied to lots of MMORPG design elements. There used to be fewer MMOs, so players had less choice, meaning you could make your game more difficult. You could add in more adversity, whether that's the difficulty of the enemies, the quests, or even understanding the systems the game is made up of. Players would have to conquer them, and so be given the reward for conquering them. Ironically now, if something is too difficult, players will leave and go to another MMO because there is so much choice. It is incredibly ironic that the design which sets up satisfaction, adversity, is also the design which drives players away. In short, if you fill your MMO with player adversity, systems which the player must overcome, it will feel incredibly satisfying when a player advances through it, but it is also far more likely the average player will quit before reaching that satisfaction, because the process is difficult. And if you fill your game with easy systems which remove adversity, it is now much more likely that players will stick around and finish your game, but also they will feel very little connection to it because they never had to overcome adversity to get there. Difficult experience means less immediate fun, but a stronger long-term appreciation of it. An easy experience means more immediate fun, but a weaker long-term appreciation of it. You only need to look at the modern-day video game difficulty mythos to see how we as players value overcoming adversity. The Pandaren who leveled to maximum without leaving the starting zone. Swampletics taking on the Theatre of Blood while locked entirely inside Mauritania. Let Me Solo Her, killing Melania wearing only a pot on his head. The Happy Hob, performing no-hit runs of the Soulsborne games, sometimes consecutively. Rendy achieving the level 3 Fire Cape in old-school RuneScape, finishing the Mario games without collecting any coins. We value and respect those who overcome adversity in games, and if that player is us, we end up valuing and respecting ourselves. So the reason many players have fond memories of older MMOs and will tell new players that older games are better is because they contained a lot more adversity and playing them demanded you overcome it, giving you as a player that deep sense of satisfaction which comes with doing that. They may not be fun in the moment, but they are infinitely more satisfying to look back on. Modern day MMORPGs have removed as much adversity as they can because that improves the early to mid-game experience. The irony, of course, is you will retain more players, but you won't be generating those very human, very intense, very memorable experiences that come with overcoming an adverse system. It's why killing a boss after 100 attempts feels better than killing the boss after one attempt. You have achieved something difficult. The irony, of course, is that most players won't stick around for 100 attempts. They will declare it too difficult and move on to a different game. Many players ask for easy routes to be added because they focus on the gameplay experience of right now more than the long-term experience and satisfaction gained by conquering a challenge. The skill in games design is to find that Goldilocks zone, where a game is challenging and rewarding while not being frustrating to the point of making a player quit. Older MMOs had much less competition. Players couldn't just leave for another game at a moment's notice, and even if they did, it would be just as difficult, so that Goldilocks zone was much broader for older MMOs. When Blizzard said, "you think you do but you don't," what they meant was they believed a modern-day MMO player base would quit classic WoW due to the adversity in the game's design, the lack of group finder and the lack of quest giver's location on the minimap, before they were able to reach the satisfying level of WoW Classic and value the experience that overcoming the adversity gave them. Modern Blizzard design seems to be remove all adversity at the expense of all long-term satisfaction. So the next time you hear an older MMO player saying they want old-style MMOs back, what they likely mean is, while they may not remember the less fun process of playing the game, they miss the end feeling of overcoming adversity that the game gave them. But what do you think? Should modern MMOs be designed with fewer features so players have to push through adversity to gain the satisfaction of overcoming it, or should the adversity be removed to increase early game player retention at the cost of long-term satisfaction? Or should self-imposed limitations, such as RuneScape's Iron Man mode, be adopted by the game industry and made available for self-imposed adversity? What's the best design choice here? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you again for watching. Another massive thank you to the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who keep the channel alive. You can support from only £1 a month. Check the video description for links to the Patreon, Twitch, Twitter and Discord. And as always, have a great day.